Isn't it awkward when you tell a joke and nobody gets it? I was just a few minutes away from officiating at a wedding ceremony for some friends of mine. And we had talked about starting the wedding ceremony with a joke. It would have happened something like this. I'd come out to start the service and I'd do it this way. Marriage. That beautiful arrangement, that dream within a dream. But as we talked about it, just before going out to where everybody was seated, we pulled back. We decided that even though we thought it was funny, that there might be some other people who hadn't seen Princess Bride, for example, and they wouldn't get it. Or some other people that just didn't think that a marriage ceremony was a place for that kind of levity. And so we pulled back. Now, that bravery that we didn't have in that situation, and wisely so, I think, but the bravery that we didn't have, the Bible does have. Because the Bible is willing to tell a joke and be misunderstood. To tell a joke that has a critical point that we need to hear, but to not be understood at all. And it all happens in a little book called the Book of Jonah. Now, I am sure that people 2,300 years ago got the joke. That is, when Jonah was written, at least 2,300 years ago, I think people read it and they got the joke that Jonah was telling. But somewhere along the line, in the last few hundred years among us Western, modern, and postmodern people, we lost our sense of humor and our ability to read Jonah in the way that it was intended. I mean, think about it. What is the first thing that you think of when you hear about Jonah? For most of us, we think about this guy that was swallowed up by a whale, right? And just a short note here, in Jonah, it's actually a large fish. It's not necessarily a whale, but what's gotten into our popular culture is the whale. And more than that, it's kind of like the battle in our own society between religion and science, which is kind of an odd thing for our society that other societies haven't had. But Jonah's kind of gotten caught in all of that battle. And it's kind of laid out like this. If you believe that a man can be swallowed by a whale or a large fish for 3 days and survive, then that means that you are religious, that you are faithful, and that you're skeptical about the whole scientific approach of things. However, if you do not believe that, as in the book of Jonah, a man can be swallowed by a large fish for 3 days and survive, then you are not really being faithful or trusting in the Bible. You're skeptical, you're not believing in religion, and yet you are very faithful to science. Now, I know these are a little simplistic and overstated, but the basic idea is there. And that is what has gotten into the popular imagination from this book of Jonah. And it completely misses the point of Jonah. What it does do is it tells us quite a bit about I would say, odd things about our own culture and our own worldview and our own assumptions about reality. But it really tells us nothing about what Jonah is trying to teach us. Oddly enough, however, in our misreading and misinterpretation of the book of Jonah, we're actually making Jonah's point, making the theme of the book of Jonah even more poignant, more true, and more clear. Jonah is the story of an Israelite prophet. And the idea of the prophet of Israel is that they are a mouthpiece of God to the people, that they hear from God and then they speak to the people what they have heard from God. And Jonah starts on script with that because Jonah hears from God. But very quickly, we learn that this is not going to be your typical story of a prophet of Israel. That this is going to be a dystopic story, a story where everything's upside down, a story where we're even supposed to laugh as we read the story. Because Jonah does not go where God tells him to go. Instead, he turns it around and runs in the exact opposite direction. God tells him to go to Nineveh to preach to the enemies of Israel. And instead of doing that, Jonah gets on a ship that's headed in the opposite direction to a city called Tarshish. Now the question is, why does Jonah do that? There's this tension throughout the story between Jonah wanting to go in one way and God getting Jonah to go in a different direction. And it all comes together in a verse in Jonah chapter 4, verse 2, where Jonah prays a prayer. This kind of puts together what's going on throughout the story. So here it is. Jonah prays to the Lord and says, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity." And as we read that prayer, we're thinking, and the problem is? Well, again, the problem is that Jonah has a particular way of viewing the world, a particular way of how the world should run. And in Jonah's mind, the people of Nineveh, who are the enemies of Israel, should not have any chance to hear a message from God. His people are the people that are God's people. They're the ones that are righteous. They're the ones that God should be with. But he should under no circumstances show his graciousness, love, and forgiveness to these people that are his enemies. And this is where this story becomes critical for us today if we can read it as it's meant to be read. Because this story is actually a mirror in which we can see our own reflection in the character of Jonah. So what is the joke that the story of Jonah is telling? Well, the best way to answer that question is for you to read the book of Jonah in the Bible. It's just 4 chapters. It's short. It's well written. You'll be able to get through it. But if I had to put it into a phrase, I'd put it something like this: that the joke that Jonah is telling is that human life progresses in spite of human intentions. And this is a joke that desperately needs to be told again and again and again in our post-pandemic age. Because I'm sure you've noticed how humorless we have become. How our world has just narrowed down to the point that we feel like our enemies are threatening not just us, but they're threatening the entire world. There are 3 critical things that this joke of Jonah can teach us. The first is just not to take ourselves so dang seriously. The second is to remember that laughter is a critical part of being human, a critical part of how we make good happen in this world. And the third is to remember that our worldview, our assumptions, our approach to life is not the ultimate, the end-all. It's partial at best. Jesus said in the Beatitudes that it was the meek who would inherit the earth. It was those who were gentle and yet willing to carry the burden of others. Those are the kinds of people that will move the world forward. And this joke of Jonah can help us move more toward that kind of meekness, a meekness that truly will make good happen in your life, in your relationships, and in our community. And that's what randylovejoy.com is all about. It's a virtual platform that's committed to helping you to create good in your life, in your relationships, and your community. So sign up for our weekly newsletter, and that will keep you up to speed on all of the things that we're developing to help you to create good in your life. Thanks.